The blessed silver chains seared into Thessaly's wrists as two enforcers dragged her forward through the grand tribunal chamber. Every eye in the room turned toward her. 300 vampires from the most powerful covens across Greenwich, Manhattan, and Beverly Hills packed into the marble hall, their collective contempt pressing against her consciousness like a psychic assault. She kept her gaze lowered, pulse racing despite her undead nature, bare feet sliding across the polished obsidian floor as they hauled her toward the raised dais where the Elder Council waited beneath blood-red chandeliers. "Bring the heretic forward," Council Elder Malachi Thornwell commanded, his voice reverberating off the vaulted cathedral ceiling. Thessaly's legs nearly buckled. Heretic. The word hung in the air like a death curse. She wasn't a heretic. She was just a blood servant who'd tended this estate faithfully for 5 years. Who'd kept her head down and her lineage buried deep where no one could unearth it. But bloodlines had a way of clawing to the surface, and hers had been dragged into the light by the one vampire who'd vowed to destroy her. Seraphine Thornwell stood at the edge of the dais, her porcelain features twisted with righteous condemnation, her crimson gown flowing like liquid rubies under the candlelight. The Elder's protégée, the Coven princess who'd made Thessaly's existence a waking nightmare from the moment she'd arrived. "There she is," Seraphine announced, gesturing dramatically toward Thessaly with pale, jeweled fingers. "The blood servant who dared to corrupt what belongs to the progenitor bloodline alone." Thessaly's throat tightened. She hadn't corrupted anything. She'd been ordered into the sanctuary vault by the estate steward to prepare the crimson blood rose for tonight's covenant gathering. And somehow, impossibly, the sacred rose had been found withering when the vault was inspected an hour later. "Thessaly Ravencourt," Elder Malachi intoned, and she flinched at her true surname spoken aloud. "You stand accused of attempted destruction of sacred relics and high treason. How do you answer?" "I didn't. I never touched it." "Liar!" Seraphine shrieked. "We found your essence signature saturating the vault. You corrupted the rose in some pathetic attempt to claim false heritage." The crowd's hisses grew louder, fangs gleaming in flickering light. "The punishment for desecrating covenant artifacts is sunlight execution at dawn," Elder Malachi declared, his ancient eyes glittering with malice. "I vote for final death." The massive ironwood doors at the back of the hall suddenly exploded inward with such force that the boom echoed like cannon fire. Every head whipped around. The crowd parted like shadows fleeing from flame, and Thessaly's breath caught as a figure stepped through the shattered entrance. He was imposing, easily 6'7", with midnight black hair and eyes the color of molten silver touched with crimson fire. Ancient power radiated from him in suffocating waves, the unmistakable aura of a vampire king who'd witnessed empires rise and fall. "King Azriath," Elder Malachi breathed, rising with barely concealed shock. "We weren't expecting your return." "Clearly." Azriath Nocturne's voice cut through the chamber like a blade through silk. He descended the center aisle with predatory grace, each footfall echoing in the sudden silence. The crowd parted before him as though his presence alone could sear their flesh. "I asked what is happening in my covenant hall. I returned to find my bloodlines assembled and a child in blessed chains." "Explain." "Your Majesty," Malachi said carefully, "this servant stands accused of corrupting the crimson blood rose." "Show me." The command was absolute. An attendant rushed forward with a velvet cushion bearing the rose. Its once radiant crystallized petals were now blackened and twisted, pulsing with wrongness. Azriath studied it with an expression that made the temperature plummet. "Fascinating. The rose hasn't been corrupted. It's dying of starvation." Confused murmurs rippled through the assembly. "The crimson blood rose withers without progenitor essence," Azriath continued, his voice carrying to every corner. "Tell me, Malachi, when was the last time a progenitor walked these halls?" The silence was suffocating. "Which is why her crime is unforgivable." Seraphine recovered quickly. "She attempted to destroy our heritage." "Or," Azriath interrupted, his silver-crimson gaze locking onto Thessaly with devastating intensity. She's the first progenitor this rose has encountered in 200 years, and someone needed her dead before it could recognize her. The chamber erupted into chaos. Absurd.
Malachi's power crackled through the air.
Her lineage has been verified. By whom? The council that has profited from the convenient absence of progenitor authority.
Azriath's smile was blade-sharp.
I invoke Ius Primi Noctis, the king's first right. This accused falls under my direct jurisdiction for bloodline investigation.
She will be remanded to my custody.
Immediately. Your Majesty, the Covenant laws. I wrote the Covenant laws. Power exploded from Azriath, driving every vampire to their knees except Thessaly, who swayed as the enforcers released her to prostrate themselves. Before she could collapse, Azriath moved, faster than thought, and caught her against his chest. His touch ignited something ancient in her blood, and the world narrowed to his eyes, his arms, his voice murmuring against her ear. I have you now. And heaven help anyone who tries to take you from me. Azriath's sanctuary existed in a place Thessaly hadn't known was possible, a subterranean chamber carved from obsidian and moonstone beneath the Greenwich estate, accessible only through a portal that shimmered like liquid starlight. The moment they passed through, the oppressive weight of the tribunal vanished, replaced by a silence so profound it felt sacred. He laid her on a chaise of black velvet near a fireplace that burned with silver flames, then knelt beside her with a gentleness that contradicted everything she'd just witnessed. Let me see your wrists. Thessaly hesitated, then extended her arms. The blessed silver had burned through skin down to muscle, the wounds weeping with a mixture of blood and something darker. She'd learned long ago to endure pain in silence, but when Azriath's fingers brushed the raw flesh, she couldn't suppress a sharp intake of breath.
Barbaric, he murmured, his jaw tightening.
He retrieved a crystal vial from a nearby cabinet, uncorking it to release the scent of nightshade and ancient earth. This will hurt worse before it heals.
I'm sorry.
The salve touched her burns and Thessaly bit down on her lip hard enough to draw blood. Fire raced through her veins, but then, blessedly, the pain began to recede, replaced by a cooling numbness. She watched in fascination as the wounds began to knit themselves closed, pink flesh replacing charred ruin.
How did you know? She whispered. About the rose.
About what I am. Azriath didn't answer immediately. He finished tending her other wrist with meticulous care, then sat back on his heels, those silver-crimson eyes studying her with an intensity that made her feel transparent. Because I knew your mother.
The world tilted.
That's impossible. My mother died 200 years ago in the Great Purge. Yes. His voice carried the weight of centuries of grief. I was there, Thessaly. I tried to save Evangeline, tried to hide her when the Covenant turned on its own bloodlines.
But I was too late.
When I found her, she was already dying. And you? He paused, pain flickering across his features. You were gone. Hidden. She made me swear I would find you if you still lived. Tears burned behind Thessaly's eyes.
I don't understand.
If you knew, why didn't you come sooner?
Because I didn't know where to look.
Evangeline used the last of her power to conceal you completely, your scent, your essence, your bloodline signature. To everyone, including me, you would appear as nothing more than what you pretended to be. He reached out, his thumb brushing away a tear that had escaped down her cheek.
Until someone tried to kill you with blessed silver.
Pain breaks concealment spells. The moment those chains touched you, I felt your mother's magic shatter halfway across the world. Seraphine, Thessaly breathed.
She knew. She's known all along. Not just her.
Azriath's expression hardened into something lethal. This conspiracy goes deeper than a jealous coven princess. The rose didn't wither by accident, and you weren't framed on impulse. Someone has been systematically starving that artifact, waiting for the last progenitor to emerge from hiding. His hand found hers, careful of her healing wrists. They wanted you dead before you could awaken. Which means we're running out of time to prove what you are, before they try again. Azriath moved to a cabinet carved from what looked like petrified bone, retrieving an ornate chalice etched with symbols Thessaly recognized from her mother's hidden grimoire. The silver flames in the fireplace flickered as though responding to his proximity, casting dancing shadows across the sharp planes of his face. "There's a way to break through the concealment spell completely," he said, returning to her side. "But it requires essence sharing, a blood ritual that will strip away every barrier your mother placed on your memories.
You'll remember everything she hid from you.
Everything you were meant to forget." Thessaly's healing wrists throbbed despite the salve. "What aren't you telling me?" His eyes met hers, and for the first time she saw uncertainty there. "The ritual creates a bond. Temporary, but intimate. I'll see your memories, and you'll see mine. Every moment of your mother's death, every failure I carry. There are things in my past that would break lesser vampires." "I'm not lesser," Thessaly said, surprising herself with the steel in her voice. "And if this is the only way to prove the truth before dawn—" "It is."
He offered her the chalice.
"But once we begin, there's no stopping until it's complete. The pain will be considerable." She thought of Seraphine's cruel smile, of Malachi's eagerness for her execution, of 5 years spent scrubbing floors and pretending to be nothing. "I've endured worse." Something like admiration flickered in Azriath's expression. He drew a silver blade across his palm without flinching, letting crimson blood pool in the chalice. Then he offered her the knife. Thessaly's hand trembled as she took it, but her cut was clean. Her blood joined his, swirling together in patterns that defied physics, creating spirals of light and shadow. The air grew thick with power. "Drink," Azriath commanded softly, lifting the chalice to her lips. The moment the combined essence touched her tongue, reality shattered. Memories exploded through her consciousness like shrapnel, not her own, but her mother's, preserved in blood and magic. She saw Evangeline Ravencourt in her full glory, a progenitor queen with eyes like molten gold, standing in this very chamber with a younger Azriath at her side. Saw the covenant before corruption, when progenitors ruled with wisdom instead of fear. Then the purge. Fire and silver and screaming. Evangeline running through burning halls, her hand pressed to a swollen belly, Azriath fighting a desperate rearguard action against impossible numbers. The birthing chamber where Thessaly entered the world amid chaos and death. Her mother's whispered incantation, pouring the last of her power into an infant's blood, weaving concealment so deep it would take torture to break.
"Live, my daughter. Live hidden. Live small. Until the king returns for you."
Thessaly gasped, the chalice falling from nerveless fingers. Azriath caught it before it hit the floor, then caught her as she collapsed forward, shaking with the weight of centuries of suppressed truth.
"I remember," she choked out.
"I remember everything. The council, Malachi was there.
He led the faction that demanded the purge. He killed her."
"He's the one who—" "Yes," Azriath said grimly, holding her as the memories continued to surface. "And now he knows you've awakened. Which means we have until dawn to prepare for war." The essence bond hummed between them like a living thing, and Thessaly could feel Azriath's emotions bleeding through, centuries of loneliness, the agony of failing Evangeline, and beneath it all, something fierce and possessive that made her breath catch. "There's more you need to understand," Azriath said, his voice rough as he helped her sit upright. His hands lingered on her shoulders, and she realized he could feel the bond too, the way her pulse quickened at his touch, the inexplicable pull drawing them together. "Your mother and I, we weren't merely allies."
Thessaly's eyes widened.
"You were. Intended mates, yes. Before the covenant laws forbade progenitor pairings.
His jaw tightened.
The council feared that two progenitors bonded would become too powerful to control. They outlawed such unions 3 centuries ago, and when Evangeline and I refused to comply, he released her, turning toward the silver flames.
We became targets.
The purge wasn't about protecting the covenant from corruption. It was about eliminating anyone who threatened the council's grip on power. The pieces fell into place with horrifying clarity. Malachi engineered the entire thing, with Seraphine's grandfather as his co-conspirator. The Thornwells have always been parasites, feeding off power they didn't earn. Azriath's hands clenched into fists. I should have seen it sooner. Should have stayed instead of fleeing in grief when Evangeline died. But I was broken. And in my absence, they've had 2 centuries to consolidate control. Thessaly stood on unsteady legs, crossing to stand beside him. The bond thrummed stronger with proximity, and she saw him tense.
Why does this feel like
recognition? He turned to face her, and the raw hunger in his eyes stole her breath. Because essence bonds don't lie, Thessaly. When we shared blood, when our memories intertwined, the bond recognized what I've suspected since the moment I saw you in chains. His hand rose to cup her face with devastating gentleness.
You're not just Evangeline's daughter. You're my destined mate.
The pairing the universe denied me once, returned in you.
She should have been terrified.
Should have pulled away from this ancient king who'd lived 1,000 lifetimes. Instead, she felt something slot into place inside her chest, a rightness she'd never experienced in 5 years of hiding. That's why Seraphine tried to kill me, she whispered. Not just because I'm a progenitor, but because the moment you awaken fully and we complete the bond, we'll be unstoppable. 2 progenitors united would shatter the council's false authority instantly.
Azriath's thumb traced her cheekbone. They need you dead before dawn, before you can touch the rose and prove your bloodline.
And they need me discredited as a relic clinging to the past. Then we give them what they want, Thessaly said, steel entering her voice.
We go to the dawn assembly. We let them think they've won.
And then I touch the rose and watch their empire burn. Azriath's smile was blade-sharp and beautiful.
My fierce mate. Your mother would be proud.
The silver flames had burned down to embers when Azriath's internal clock, honed by millennia of avoiding the sun, warned him that dawn approached. Through the sanctuary's enchanted ceiling, Thessaly could see the sky beginning to lighten from black to deep indigo.
2 hours, perhaps 3, before full sunrise. Before her scheduled execution.
They'll have prepared the eastern chamber, Azriath said, his tactical mind already working through scenarios. Silver chains anchored to the floor, spelled glass that magnifies sunlight. They'll want you to burn slowly, publicly. A warning to anyone else who might challenge the council's authority. Thessaly's newly awakened memories provided brutal context. She'd seen progenitors burn before, in her mother's recollections.
It wasn't a quick death. How do we stop them?
We don't. He turned from where he'd been selecting items from an armory cabinet, holding an ancient ceremonial robe of deep crimson silk embroidered with silver runes. We let them take you to the chamber.
Let them chain you.
Let them think they've won.
Her stomach dropped.
Azriath. Your awakening needs to be public and undeniable, he continued, approaching with the robe. If I simply declare you progenitor, Malachi will claim I'm delusional, clinging to a dead lover's memory. But if you awaken in front of 300 witnesses, if the rose itself confirms your blood.
He held out the garment. This was your mother's. She wore it the night she was supposed to be crowned progenitor queen.
It's woven with protective enchantments, but more importantly, it will resonate with your bloodline when the awakening begins. Thessaly took the robe with trembling hands, feeling the thrum of ancient power in every thread.
What if I can't control it?
The awakening, I mean. What if it destroys me instead?
It won't.
Azriath's certainty was absolute. The essence bond will anchor you. I'll be in that chamber, and through our connection, I can channel the excess power if it threatens to overwhelm you.
His expression softened.
I failed your mother. I won't fail you. She changed behind a carved screen, the crimson silk settling against her skin like a living thing, warm and welcoming. When she emerged, she saw something flash in Azriath's eyes, grief and desire and fierce protectiveness all tangled together.
You look exactly like her, he said quietly. And nothing like her at all.
A distant bell chimed, the sound carrying even into the sanctuary.
The 1-hour warning before dawn assembly. Azriath offered his arm.
Are you ready to reclaim your throne, Thessaly Ravencourt? To face the vampires who murdered your mother and make them kneel before the power they tried to extinguish?
Thessaly thought of 5 years scrubbing floors.
Of Seraphine's cruelty and Malachi's cold ambition. Of her mother dying alone while Thessaly was hidden away, powerless and forgotten. She took his arm, feeling the essence bond flare between them like a promise.
Let them try to burn me, she said.
I'll show them what rises from ash. The eastern chamber was exactly as brutal as Azriath had predicted, a circular room with floor-to-ceiling windows designed to flood with killing sunlight, silver chains embedded in the marble floor, and 300 vampires crowded into the galleries above, their faces hungry for spectacle. Thessaly walked through the assembly under armed escort, her mother's crimson robe flowing behind her like spilled blood. She could feel their contempt, their certainty that she was nothing. Even Seraphine's smile had grown triumphant, all pretense of concern abandoned now that dawn approached. Malachi stood at the center of the chamber, beside the withered crimson blood rose on its velvet cushion. Thessaly Ravencourt, you have been judged guilty of treason against the Covenant.
Your execution will proceed as scheduled.
Have you any final words? She opened her mouth, but Azriath's voice cut through the chamber like thunder. I do. He descended from the king's gallery, power radiating from him in waves that made the lesser vampires shrink back. When he reached the execution circle, he turned to face the assembly with absolute authority. You want proof of her bloodline.
His voice carried to every corner.
You demand evidence before you'll accept that a progenitor still lives? Then witness. He turned to Thessaly, and through their bond she felt his silent apology for what came next. By my authority as first sire and covenant king, I invoke the right of forced awakening.
Gasps rippled through the galleries.
The right was forbidden, ancient, capable of killing the subject if their bloodline couldn't withstand the strain. Azriath placed his palm against Thessaly's chest, directly over her heart. Forgive me, he whispered, then unleashed his power. It felt like being struck by lightning from the inside. Thessaly screamed as ancient magic tore through her, ripping away every suppression, every concealment, every barrier her mother had woven. The dormant progenitor blood that had slept in her veins for 2 centuries suddenly ignited like wildfire. Her body lifted from the ground, levitating as crimson gold energy exploded outward in concentric waves. The silver chains meant to bind her shattered into dust. Her eyes blazed with light so intense that vampires in the galleries threw up their hands to shield themselves. The pain was transcendent, apocalyptic. But through it, she felt Azriath's presence in her mind, the essence bond acting as a conduit, siphoning off the excess power that would have torn her apart. I have you, his voice echoed in her consciousness. Let it come. Let them see what they tried to destroy. Something erupted from her shoulder blades. Massive wings formed from pure shadow and crystallized essence, spanning 20 feet, each feather edged in crimson fire. The temperature in the chamber dropped 30 degrees as her awakened power consumed the ambient energy, feeding on the fear and shock of the assembled vampires. Thessaly Ravencourt hung suspended in the air, wings spread, eyes burning with ancient authority, and finally, understood what she was meant to be.
Not a servant. Not a victim.
A progenitor queen, awakened and absolutely unstoppable. Thessaly's feet touched the marble floor with a resonance that cracked the stone in a spiderweb pattern. The shadow and essence wings folded against her back, solid enough to feel but translucent enough to see through, each feather pulsing with crimson gold light in time with her racing heart. Power thrummed through her veins like molten metal, barely contained, threatening to tear her apart if she didn't find an outlet. Through the haze of overwhelming sensation, she saw Malachi's face, no longer confident, but calculating. He stepped back from the rose's cushion, his expression unreadable. "The awakening proves nothing," he announced, though his voice lacked its earlier certainty. "Forced awakenings can manufacture false presentations. Only the crimson blood rose can verify true progenitor lineage, and as we all witnessed, she corrupted." "Then let her touch it," Azriath interrupted, his hand steady on Thessaly's shoulder, grounding her through their bond. "If she's false, the rose will reject her. If she's true—"
His smile was predatory. "Well,
"We'll all see, won't we?"
Seraphine moved to block the cushion. "This is irregular.
The accused shouldn't be allowed to destroy evidence."
"Move."
Thessaly's voice came out layered with harmonics, the sound of multiple frequencies speaking as one. She hadn't meant to use compulsion, but the command hit Seraphine like a physical blow, sending her stumbling backward. The galleries erupted in shocked murmurs. Compulsion was a progenitor ability, impossible to fake. Thessaly approached the withered rose on trembling legs, barely aware of the 300 vampires holding their collective breath. The artifact looked worse up close, petals blackened and curling, the crystallized blood that formed its structure cracking and flaking away. Dying, as Azriath had said. Starved for the bloodline it was created to serve. She reached out, her hand glowing with crimson gold energy, and touched a single withered petal. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. The rose exploded with light, not destructively, but expansively, as though it had been compressed for centuries and finally released. Blackened petals unfurled into pristine crimson beauty, each one growing larger, more radiant, pulsing with supernatural vitality. The crystallized blood structure repaired itself in seconds, cracks sealing, color flooding back into what had been desiccated ruin. But more than that, the rose began to bloom beyond its original form, sprouting new petals, new layers, growing until it was twice its former size, radiating waves of ancient magic that washed over the assembly like a tidal force. And then the petals themselves began to glow with script, ancient covenant symbols writing themselves in light across each crimson surface, spiraling outward in concentric patterns that spelled out a truth 2 centuries old.
Evangeline Serre. True progenitor. Last of the blood.
Rightful sovereign. The words hung in the air, blazing bright enough to hurt, reflected in 300 pairs of stunned eyes. Thessaly staggered back from the rose, its power still coursing through her, and felt Azriath catch her against his chest. "Kneel," he commanded the assembly, his voice absolute. "Kneel before your progenitor queen." One by one, they fell to their knees. All except Malachi and Seraphine, frozen in horror as their conspiracy shattered like glass. From the shadows of the uppermost gallery, a figure emerged that made even Azriath tense with recognition. Octavius Dreadhaven was ancient in a way that transcended mere age. His presence felt like walking through a graveyard at midnight, cold and inevitable and absolutely impartial. As keeper of covenant records, he served no faction, answered to no council, existed only to preserve truth. He descended the stairs with the slow deliberation of continental drift, carrying a locked iron chest that radiated preservation spells. The assembled vampires parted before him like water before a ship's bow, their kneeling forms creating a pathway straight to where Malachi stood frozen. Octavius, Malachi said, recovering some composure. This is hardly the time for archival procedures. On the contrary. The keeper's voice was dust and parchment and buried secrets. This is precisely the time. He placed the chest at Thessaly's feet, then produced a key from within his robes, a key that looked like it was carved from a finger bone. 200 years ago, Progenitor Queen Evangeline Ravencourt came to me in secret, 3 days before the purge began.
She knew what was coming.
She knew who had orchestrated it. The chest opened with a click that echoed like a death knell. Inside lay documents, testimony written in blood ink that couldn't be forged, signed confessions from lower-ranking conspirators who'd been promised power and received poison instead, and damning correspondence in Malachi's own hand. Octavius lifted the top document, his ancient eyes scanning words he clearly memoized centuries ago. The progenitor bloodlines have grown too powerful, he read aloud. They must be eliminated before they unite and render the council obsolete. I propose we manufacture a crisis, accusations of blood corruption, and use it to justify a systematic purge.
He looked up at Malachi.
Signed by you and Sebastian Thornwell, dated 6 months before the first progenitor was murdered. Seraphine's face had gone from porcelain pale to gray. That's, grandfather wouldn't. Your grandfather was the architect, and your father continued the work. Octavius continued, producing another document. Correspondence from 3 weeks ago, detailing the plan to frame Thessaly Ravencourt, should she ever emerge from hiding. Signed by you, Seraphine, and countersigned by Malachi as approval. Lies.
Malachi's power crackled outward desperately.
The keeper has been compromised, bought by. Silence. Azriath's command hit like a physical blow, driving Malachi to his knees.
Keepers cannot lie about records.
It's magically impossible. You know this. Guards materialized from the shadows, Azriath's personal enforcers, who'd clearly been positioned in advance. They seized Malachi and Seraphine with blessed silver chains, the same kind that had burned Thessaly's wrists. For conspiracy to commit genocide, for the murder of progenitor Queen Evangeline Ravencourt, and for 2 centuries of fraudulent governance, Azriath pronounced, his voice carrying the weight of absolute sovereignty. I sentence you both to the blood tombs beneath Manhattan. Sealed. Eternal. Without appeal. Seraphine screamed as they dragged her away. Malachi remained silent, but his eyes promised murder as they locked on Thessaly one final time before the chamber doors slammed shut behind him.
The threat was gone. But the covenant would never be the same.